it's a thing that nobody saw coming here. Republican House Majority Leader, the guy in the screen, Eric Cantor, beaten, not in the general, but by a Tea Party-backed David Brat. Tell me you heard that guy's name before last night in a Tuesday night primary shocker. Cantor says he's stepping down. Is the Tea Party victory a wake-up call for the Grand Old Party? And Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, he on the hot seat today testifying before Congress about the Bergdahl prisoner swap. Hagel says the military could have given the government a heads up about the negotiation, but was forced to act quickly. Did the feds do the right thing? And has the media condemned Bergdahl before we've even learned the facts? And finally, call it a conflict of interest. Two attorneys representing BPs in the oil spill disaster. Get this, their sons are Supreme Court justices who are presiding over the case. Does the case hit too close to home? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. And tonight, we start with the Republican primary and House Majority Leader Eric Cantor's shocking defeat. And that's the only way you can categorize this thing. Cantor says he's not even waiting until the end of the year. He's resigning from his post at the end of next month. Cantor, who calls himself a conservative Republican, he raised nearly $5.5 million with the help of investments from Wall Street donors, groups like the NRA. But in the end, big money couldn't save him. He was beaten, and beaten kind of handily, 55 to 44%, by a college economics professor, David Brat, whose campaign raised a couple $100,000. He had 2 paid staffers and a 23-year-old campaign manager who graduated from college last year. Cantor, he had 23 paid staffers as a frame of reference and help from a multitude of consulting firms. Now, here's the surprise. This wasn't some huge ideological divide, or at least you wouldn't think so. Both guys hold highly conservative views. Cantor, for example, opposes elective abortion, gun control of any kind, embryonic stem cell research. He's against gay marriage. This is not some progressive here. Brat, he opposes all those same things as well, including, of course, Obamacare, immigration reform. And that last one, which many people say that followed this race, was a deal breaker and also could be a sign of things to come in the next not only election cycle, but even beyond. Now, Hillary Clinton took a break from her book tour to comment on this race here and the results, saying Cantor lost to a candidate who basically ran against immigrants. And most people think she's right. Cantor and Brad both spoke out about the election after the returns came in.
It's disappointing, sure. But I believe in this country. I believe there's opportunity around the next corner for all of us.
The reason we won this campaign is there's just one reason, and that's because dollars do not vote. You do.
And everybody's got an opinion on this. Fox News commentator Laura Ingraham, who's got, I would say, a pretty good pulse to the conservative side of the party, or the very, very conservative side. She backed Brat's campaign in this, saying Republicans need to wake up and smell the coffee.
This is a massive wake-up call to the Republican Party if they choose to actually, wake up at this point. If they don't, if John Boehner and Paul Ryan and the rest of the crew and the GOP establishment moves forward after this race with this idea of, quote, immigration reform, which is a pathway to some type of amnesty eventually, they will put a wedge down the middle of the Republican Party that will, in my mind, prevent Republicans from winning in 2016, exactly the opposite of what they're contending.
All right, I want to bring in the panel on this one because there's a lot to digest. And trust me, we wouldn't be talking about this thing if this was just some Virginia House race. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist and author, and Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent. Okay, first off, anybody who tells you that they could have named this guy a little and predicted he would have won. I was watching a network yesterday who was saying, why the heck is Cantor spending $1 million in the last few weeks of this campaign here? Is he just trying to run up the score? He lost and lost by double digits. We've said, oh, that was a surprise. This is beyond an upset that this thing could happen. I don't know the right word for it, Dominic, but nobody saw it coming.
Nobody saw this coming. And tragically, this is going to continue. It may be a local race, but every American should be paying attention to it, because this victory last night will continue to add to gridlock in Congress. For every Republican that may have been willing to say, let's cross party lines and work with Democrats, they're going to look to this race in this mostly conservative Richmond district and say, hey, look at what happened to Cantor. And so, you know, while we were burying the Tea Party, guess what? Perhaps it was a little premature, because it's going to breathe new life, if you will, into Tea Party across America that feel that they can win.
And let me add something that'll add a little shiver of fright to everybody, following up on what Dominic said about that lack of crossing and finding middle ground. The budget deal expires September 30th of this year. Ooh. A month before the election. We're going to be without a budget. And do you think we're going to be able to get a budget deal, or do you think we're looking at the potential for a government shutdown?
But again, I think what happens is people see a return and say, oh, the Tea Party guy, he beat the moderate. And in fact, I even saw some reporting. Eric Cantor was not a moderate.
Oh, no.
Eric Cantor, at every opportunity, was willing to go over the fiscal cliff for us. He fought the idea of TARP. He fought, remember when we were going in 08 here? He was like, shut it all, you know, let it all go to hell. I mean, this is not anybody who would ever be considered to be in moderate. Chris Shays, one of our favorite guests here on the program, former Republican from Connecticut. I'll call him a moderate. He's not in the area code with this guy. And he loses, and the message, I mean, let's just take immigration for a second. The immigration plan that was making its way through Congress wasn't even as progressive as the one that George W. Bush put through 8 years ago. So it's not like this is some radical idea. The majority of the American public supports this. Republican leadership said right after they lost to Obama in 08 that we got to do this. We'll never win races again with just all white guys. The idea that, well, forget about that. That's DOA. You said it. Budgets or any kind of practical, like even moderate deal, forget a progressive deal, it's not going to happen.
You said that Eric Cantor was conservative. Eric Cantor was the Tea Party guy who was basically next in line to take over for John Boehner, and there were rumors that Boehner might call it quits at some point. He was expected to be the next Speaker of the House as the Tea Party's front person. That gives you an idea of how far right the GOP and even the Tea Party has moved on all this. Now, expanding on the gridlock and the problems that this is going to cause, let's go past November. Let's go into next year. First of all, the debt limit expires on March 15th. I can't believe I'm bringing up those two subjects, the debt limit and the budget again. But that anybody who's elected, the House is going to stay Republican after November. But what incentive will there be for any Republican to stick their neck out and try to forge a deal on these things, on these vital things that the country needs to get going, if they're afraid that they're going to get a challenge from their right the same way that Eric Cantor did? Eric Cantor, who was perfectly safe. So, you know, this is going to extend at least all the way through the 2016 presidential election. I think this may actually help Democrats in the 2016 election.
That's what I want to get to, Andrew, which is right now the president, he'd been purposely staying behind the scenes, and there was a little bit of momentum moving on the immigration reform, because he said, if I get into it, it'll just make it, you know, politically unfeasible for Republicans. You can argue the president says, screw it. I'm going to start doing executive orders all over the place, and it's more limited than a piece of legislation that'll actually get the stamp of approval from Congress, and it's not going to become law. However, there's a lot of things that he can do with executive orders that he's held off to this point. Does today's victory help Democrats or hurt Democrats? And I ask that because now it'll be all in the Democrats without any Republican support if they try and get anything through from now on to the end of the year. But on the flip side, they'll force Republicans to fight stuff that are popular politically nationally here, and say, here's what we're for, here's what they're against. You decide.
To me, this hurts more than Democrats. It hurts the American people because all politics are local. That's the bottom line. Leadership, Democrat, Republican, does not lose, and Cantor lost. So if he had the pulse of his district, and in his district in Virginia, he was considered a moderate. We say he's extremely conservative. But again, we got to look at it from the point of view from the people that sent him to Washington and the people that gave him his retirement slip.
I think you make a mistake with that. I think we all read in who votes in a primary. Let's be honest. You got to be diehard.
The party faithful.
But not just the faithful. I mean, the diehards that go out and vote. It's a different population, or it's a much broader population come the general. obviously you got two parties voting, but more than that, people say, you know what, I'm going to get invested in this. I bet you a lot of Republicans stayed home yesterday in that Virginia district because they said, why bother? He's going to win.
Actually, higher turnout than there was 2 years ago.
But you know my point
No,
here,
I
right?
I understand. I understand. It's a very narrow band, and so that's the way it always works.
And then we
out.
drive assumptions off of the most fervent fringe instead of what the mainstream of this country is for.
Absolutely. It's always the people who are the most motivated in a primary election. You always get the hardcore of the base. So certainly that plays a role. You asked what the impact is going forward politically and electorally. It doesn't really have any impact on the House in 2014. The House is going to stay Republican. May impact the Senate because from now until November, Democrats are just going to roll out one popular issue after another and make them vote it down. And if it dies in the House, they can still paint the Senate with that. So Democrats may actually get a little bit of help in the Senate. I think the real winner here is Hillary Clinton or whoever the Democratic nominee for president is in 2016, because I think this kind of thing and the reaction you're going to get from Republicans who refuse to compromise, refuse to cross the aisle, refuse to work together, is that it's going to help a Democratic presidential candidate in 2016. I think this is the kind of thing that seals the fate of the White House going forward, but it doesn't, what kind of Congress would she have when she gets in 2016?
We don't have time for it, but when you hear what this guy Brat, his idea of the America he wants here, people, not just in Richmond, but all across here, they're saying, okay, Republicans defend this because guy's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Okay, head over to Facebook here and Twitter to sound off on today's question. Is the Tea Party, or at least the results that we saw today, good or bad here for America? Some say, hey, there's a purity and a real clarity with where their positions are as it relates to role of government. And others say, as we've just talked about here, the political consequences or the lack of any kind of cooperation here or at least negotiation on things. That's brought us to a gridlock that now might be stuck in park for a long, long time. All right, coming up next, everybody. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel on the hot seat, taking the stand, testifying before Congress about the Bergdahl prisoner swap. The question is, did the media here, and all of us included, jump the gun on this? And are there legitimate questions that the Secretary better answer? Stay with us.